Welcome to All Grown Up Now, Tales of a Checkered Past. I'm Kenneth D. King, podcasting from my studio near Union Square in New York City. This podcast is an evolution of the tale, All Grown Up Now, A Friendship in 3 Acts. This is Season 2, and it's called Tales of a Checkered Past. It's a collection of short stories from my salad days on up to the present. In each podcast, another self-contained story will be presented. These podcasts will be broadcast bi-weekly, so you get 2 a month. Enjoy. I call episode 55 The Chicago Stories. Over the years, I have come to the conclusion that people are either compatible with different places or they aren't. For me, it's Chicago. I'm not compatible with Chicago. Interactions I have had with Chicago have always had a glitch, and they still do. Now, before I go any further, I want to say to my listeners in Chicago that it's a beautiful city, and I'm sure you all love it. I'm not saying Chicago is bad. I'm just saying that I personally seem not to get along with it. It's a geography thing. Now, mind you, I didn't know Chicago would be glitchy at first. My first unpleasant experience was during my first year in business. It was a store named Janice. The proprietress of this store was a woman named Janice Siegel, and she ran an art-to-wear or wearable art boutique in Chicago. Now, first of all, I have issues with the terms wearable art and art-to-wear. These were popular terms in the 1980s, but a very wise man warned me off of categorizing myself as such. I was selling in a little boutique in San Francisco across from the Zuni restaurant called Talaio, which translates to loom in Italian, I'm told. It was founded by a Cody Award-winning man named Jackson Allen. Jackson told me that he felt what I created was couture, not wearable art. He explained, art to wear sounds like I am wearing someone's art project or art to embarrass yourself in. The piece is the star, not the person wearing it. Your aim is to enhance the wearer to make her the star. That makes it couture. And I have remembered that ever since. But back to Janice Siegel. She ordered 2 evening wraps in the fall of 1987, and I shipped them a few days before the stock market crash. I had budgeted that money to take me to the end of the year. When the market crashed, I got a funny feeling in my stomach about her. And yes, she did stiff me.
Oh no.
But not only did she stiff me, she kept one of the wraps and sent back the other one after leaving in a window for far too long. It was so sun-bleached I couldn't sell it, and I have it to this day. The kicker. She also kept both of the black velvet cases that I had built for those wraps. If I ever meet her, I'll spit in her eye. That transaction gone wrong wrecked my finances. Now we fast forward to the early 1990s. I was in a PBS sewing series called Sewing Today. The host was Nancy Fleming, former Miss America 1961. Her talent was sewing. True story. You can see it on YouTube if you don't believe me. One of the sponsors was, which is based in Aurora, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. The president was a man named Rich, and the technical person for the project was a gal named. While we were working on the series, I learned that these two were dating. No big deal, I thought. How nice for him. No doubt a widower, finding a second chance at love, And she was a little homely, so she found a chance at love too. How nice. Eventually, they married, which I thought was sweet. But when they got married, they were both fired. When they got fired, a new president came in. He was named, and he was Swiss. He was a little man, not unattractive, but his accent made him sound like a character that Tim Conway would have done on The Carol Burnett Show. For my younger listeners, look it up on YouTube. I felt a bit sorry for the two of them, but they got a golden parachute of sorts. They decided to start a publishing company, committed to buying their first books, so they asked me to be their first author. I signed on to a 5-year contract for my first book. Things were looking up. However, it was only after I signed that I learned that he was not a widower. Uh-oh. On the contrary, he was already married. He was Catholic with a wife and several children, and he divorced his wife to have an affair with and eventually marry her. I pondered that choice. I didn't know anything about the wife, but she was, well, homely, which made me wonder exactly what charms she possessed to lure him from his wife and family. Ack. By that time, though, I was stuck. It was my first adventure in publishing, and I could do a whole podcast on that. Let's just say that I eventually forced the book out of print due to a contractual dispute. Uh-huh. While I was still on the radar, I taught at one of their universities, which happened to be in Aurora that year. When word got out about this, I was contacted by a woman named who owned a fancy fabric store in the suburb. She asked me if I could teach a day at her shop after my gig was up. I told her my terms, day rate plus hotel and airfare. She agreed to this. Or so she said. Once my time at was done, I drove to the address she gave me, which turned out to be her house, not her shop. I got out of the car and she welcomed me in. "We're having a barbecue for you," she crowed, and she was an old crow. "Here, let me show you to your room." "Wait," I said. "I stay in a hotel." "Oh, nonsense. Why would you want to stay in a hotel when you can get a home-cooked meal and be in a homey place?" Because that's what my terms are," I answered. Now, this was a bind. Some of my friends said I should have just walked, but I don't like to be a no-show as my reputation is in question. She struck me as the kind of who, if I didn't show because she welched on her agreement, would talk all sorts of smack about me. So I just sat my suitcase down in her living room and resigned myself to sleeping in a strange house. And strange it was. Her husband, who struck me as having dementia, they were both really old, sat staring blankly all during the barbecue, which was populated by a number of equally old folks. When it was time to retire, I was shown to my room. It was furnished with old lady furniture, a faded pink chenille bedspread, and scratchy sheets on a lumpy mattress. The whole room, well, actually the whole house, smelled like mildew and old piss. Comfy. About an hour after retiring, I heard the door open. It was the old man. He wandered into my room and stood by my bed, staring. She came in to fetch him, but this repeated throughout the night. The whole thing felt like the Bates Motel. I didn't get a wink of sleep, which didn't help my teaching the next day. The next morning, told me of her plans for dinner that evening, implying I'd be staying there overnight again. I'd be goddamned if I was going to. During a lunch break the next day while I was teaching, I called this guy I had been set up with on a blind date for the following day. Now, I've covered my bad luck with blind dates before, and eventually this one did not disappoint. But while we were talking about when and where we would meet, I asked him if there was a bathhouse in Chicago. It was a practical and inexpensive solution to my lodging problem. "Well, I'm offended that you're asking me that," he huffed like some offended old lady. "I'm not asking if you go to a bathhouse, dude, just if a bathhouse exists," I replied. "I can't stay another night with this creepy old lady and her demented husband. I might end up murdered." He gave me the name of the bathhouse. I looked it up in the yellow pages and lied to creepy, telling her that one of my friends in Chicago insisted I stay at his house that night. I ended up at the bathhouse, checked into a room, and got a good night's sleep. The next morning, I arrived at the diner that the guy had suggested. Now, I should have trusted my gut. After I asked him about the bathhouse, he seemed to reconsider his choice of brunch location. I think he had planned on something a little more gay, but decided after I asked about the bathhouse that he might not have wanted to be seen with me, not gay enough. As it was, I arrived first. He arrived several minutes later. Now, he was incredibly good-looking. But when he saw me, he was incredibly disappointed. And he didn't have the good grace to hide it. The entire breakfast was an endless stream of his chatter on how much of a big deal he was in Chicago. It was painful. "Just beat me. Pull my fingernails out with the pliers. It's quicker." At one point, he got up to go to the men's room. While he was away, the waitress, who looked like someone's mom, came up and put her hand on my shoulder. "This isn't going well, is it, honey?" she asked sympathetically. Humiliated, I replied, "No, it's not. I'm leaving and he's paying." And I got up and left. I ditched my plans to tour the architectural wonders of Chicago and headed straight for the airport. My next Chicago glitch was during a summer teaching gig. I was to be teaching in a loft space somewhere in Chicago. The gals who brought me in didn't check the venue or didn't think to check to see if there was air conditioning in Chicago in the summer. In their defense, it didn't occur to me to ask either. I know better now. The heat wave that swept over Chicago that week killed 11 people. And I was teaching in an unair-conditioned space with irons on, trying to teach a sewing class. Several of the students raised a ruckus, and the gals who hired me kept coming over asking if I was okay. I told them I deserved combat pay for this one, damn it. My next interaction with Chicago was by long distance. There was a posh store in Chicago called Ultimo. I believe that some investors bought it and decided to open 3 more branches in Dallas, San Francisco, and Palm Beach. I was introduced to the buyer by an acquaintance, more on her later, who I will call the Time Bandit. She had lived in Chicago, and she was friends with the buyer. Since Ultimo was opening the San Francisco store, it was decided that they should have some local talent represented. The buyer and the Time Bandit came to the studio. Ms. Buyer was smitten, saying that I was the new Charles James, whom she had met years before, and of course she wanted my stuff for the Dallas store as well as San Francisco. Plans were made to launch me in a trunk show, and a date was set. I was assured that their marketing department was working up a campaign. Oh, it was going to be so exciting. However, I didn't see any signs of promotion. Not in the press, not in ads for the store, nothing. I got to the store on the day of the show, and there it was in the window, a sign. A sign. That was the only promotional effort. Only my friends stopped by. It was a humiliation. The Dallas Trunk Show was marginally better attended, only because I got to work to send out press releases and invitations to any and all people I knew in Dallas. Afterwards, Ms. Beyer dropped me like a hot potato because she said, well, I didn't sell.
Uh-huh.
But back to the Time Bandit. I met her through friends. She took a liking to me, which turned out to be an enormous drain on my time. This is her story. She was born in Dallas to a good family. She was a debutante and looked like a young Elizabeth Taylor. I saw photos. She married the young medical student, put him through school. He traded her in for a younger model, and she got old, fat, and bitter. She got a whopping settlement, so she didn't have to work. She had plenty of time on her hands, so she would either drop by unannounced or call. Since we didn't have caller ID in those days, I didn't realize I was trapped on the phone until I had said hello. She was one of those people who doesn't ask, "Is this a good time?" No, she just charged forth with an unending stream of talk. It's as if she never took a breath between sentences. Now, my friend Jackie, who once did a catering gig for her, calls her the one whose name can't be spoken. This is because whenever we would talk about her, if we mentioned her name, she would soon appear. It was very weird. I kept in touch with the Time Bandit for a while when I moved to New York and she moved back to Chicago. Then I had the afternoon that was the last straw. It involved a very good-looking telephone repairman. Think a hunky, buff Anderson Cooper with a tool belt. I'd been having trouble with my landline. The building that adjoins mine was renovating and expanding and had built up over the terminal box, and it put the corner of 18th and Broadway service out. I called and finally raised enough of a ruckus to get someone to fix it. Mr. Toolbelt came in, opened my side window, and leaned out. Then he called me over. "See that line coming from 17th and Broadway?" he asked. While I was leaning out the window, he leaned in very close to me, pointing out what looked like an extension cord. "Yeah, I see," I said, looking admiringly at his bicep under his white t-shirt. "You must have really rattled someone's cage to get them to run a line just for you," he chuckled. "Now, I need to get this connected." Once the line was working, we stood around chatting flirtatiously. I was well pleased with how this afternoon was shaping up. Telephone repairman with a white t-shirt, tool belt, biceps. Afternoon. And then the phone rang. The caller ID said, "Time Bandit." Not now, I thought. I looked over at Mr. Toolbelt and said, "I'll let that go to voicemail." "Oh no, answer it," he said. "I want to know if it works." But, I said, "No, go ahead, I'll wait." I took a breath and answered. This is," and an unbroken stream of talk started. It was like a runaway train, and I couldn't stop it or interrupt it. Finally, Mr. Toolbelt whispered regretfully, "I gotta go." And I let him out. Bye. Damn. I vowed never to speak to her again, and I haven't. Chicago. Another glitchy Chicago experience started innocently enough. I was engaged to teach for 5 days at a bed and breakfast in another suburb of Chicago. The retreat would be held in an old mansion. Some Gilded Age industrialist got his fortune and built this Belle Epoque pile. In the late 1920s, he died, and the house was closed, boarded up, with his watch on the dresser, his suits in his closet, and the car in the garage. A time capsule. The current owners bought it for back taxes in the 1980s. Happily, the car in the garage was a rare Lincoln that they could sell to a car museum, and that eliminated the mortgage. They turned the house into a bed and breakfast. The house itself was quite beautiful, with almost all of its original detail intact. There were things like Tiffany stained glass windows, and flanking the staircase, a built-in curio cabinet on one side, a built-in grandfather clock on the other. I learned something from this gig. Insist on a room off-site, which I didn't know to do before this. The woman who engaged me was, I soon discovered, a rather tightly wound perfectionist. She was also new to the business of producing sewing retreats. After the first day, she seemed a little twitchy. The second morning, she called me upstairs into the servants' quarters to dress me down about not following her schedule. "Are you getting any complaints?" I asked. "Well, no," she said haltingly. "Everyone is saying how they're enjoying it." "Then what's the problem?" I asked. "I want it to be perfect," she wailed. "I thought I'd get to take the class along with everyone else. Instead, I'm running around taking care of things." "Yeah," I responded. "That's a common mistake people make when they start doing this, that they get to take the class for free. Just let me teach the way I know how, and as long as everyone gets their money's worth, it's all good." The gal got a little more relaxed as the days wore on, but I didn't. I discovered that in this kind of situation, I wasn't left alone, not for a moment, no time off. I wanted to drag the damn dresser in front of the door just to get away. Now for my next glitchy Chicago experience, I had learned my lesson. The next sewing retreat was in Elgin, another suburb of Chicago. I had my own hotel room for this one. The gal who hired me had founded a pattern-making software company. She didn't have experience drafting patterns. Rather, she was a computer programmer who found the existing pattern-making software lacking. She was a plus-size gal, and when she put her measurements into one of those drafting software programs, it came back with the error message, "Use human measurements." She was rather large. So, thinking that she was smart enough, she produced a software and she had a group of women beta test it. As a reward to them, she hired me for 6 days to teach them tailoring. As I'm a bit suspicious of this kind of software, I insisted on a full day to check muslins for fit before we cut into the fabric, which was a good idea. The first muslin to come out was a train wreck. Thinking that was a fluke, I fixed it. The next muslin, train wreck. Again and again, train wreck, train wreck, train wreck. By this time, someone had gone and gotten her, and she sat there watching the fittings. I would ask her one thing or another, diplomatically, because she was paying me, like, "And how did you arrive at this?" When I wanted to shout, "What the fuck?" So for 6 days, I helped her debug her software and did a little bit of tailoring demonstrations. The ladies, sadly, never got their jackets made. Now, there have been other minor glitches in Chicago. Usually when flying in or out, there's a delay. But I've discovered there is always a pattern, and my lesson, beware Chicago. Thanks for listening. You can get the audiobook All Grown Up Now on iTunes, Audible, and Amazon, or from my website, allgrownupnow.com. You can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Play. If you have any questions, you can reach me through the website allgrownupnow.com. You can follow me on Instagram at Kenneth D. King, on Facebook at Kenneth D. King Design, or on my main website, kennethdking.com.